I think it can't be denied that we live at a moment where there is a lot of violence towards different bodies, including the human bodies, especially in our part of the world, but also towards the so-called nature. And I think that part of what we're trying to do as a collective is to give a voice to some of these bodies. In a way, it's almost an act of witnessing or a testimony to this violence.
Sijil, we started working facing the conflict. When the conflict began, that's when Khalid had kind of an imperative to begin to react and to stand facing that violence. And of course, that violence was quite familiar to Salim, Jannah and I, who were all kind of born in the Lebanese Civil War. And so it was very natural for us to combine all our forces to start. And our project, Birdsong Now, is literally an act of resistance to occupation.
This is the fourth project in a series of projects called Monuments of the Everyday. Monuments of the Everyday are interventions that we do together as Sijil that operate as forms of creative resistance within the Syrian landscape. All these projects have a component which is an actual intervention on the ground in Syria, but also an exhibition somewhere very far away. And we are usually interested in somehow trying to bring these two very distinct spaces together within the space of this project. So Salim has a 4-year-old daughter, Layla, who in many ways is our primary audience and judge for this project. And essentially in a brief that asks us to try to understand what broken nature is, which is the theme of the Triennale, we kind of chose the bird as this omnipresent image of nature. I think generally we're less interested, and we think Layla understands that we're less interested in birds that are flesh and feather, but more interested in birds that sort of operate on the level of narrative, story, image, and how these different birds somehow are parts of our lives. How, at least I would hope, that Layla understands that she, as a human body, is also partially bird. And part of that birdness is somehow being part of a much larger ecosystem infrastructure that she's embedded within. The project is structured around a particular song, which operates as the spine for the entire narrative that we're trying to put together. So this is the song. It's Ya Tuyur by Esmahan, who is a famous diva from the 30s and the 40s. These are the assembled stories that we've collected from different historical and contemporary sources to tell a story about a particular entanglement between man and bird. And so the first one is called Ya Tuyur, which is O Birds, and it's a story of a god who shoots a bird and in order to seduce women and also to be able to feed large amounts of people. This is a story about one of us who fell in love with a boy who could tell birds apart based on their song, and how when telling the story to a friend, he told her or him that he could actually distinguish different bombs falling on the city from their sound. We are aware that One of the reasons we are invited to participate in places like the Triennale is because we are supposed to represent a particular voice that might or might not be other to the voice that is commonly heard in these spaces. But we think that there's a certain value in not only moving a voice that is here to a place in the north like Milan, but also there's a certain conception of space and space making and place making that happens within the exhibition that we also want to bring to the Jolan. We very much understand this as an act of mutual contamination.
At the beginning of the Syrian conflict, I had kind of this reaction when Europe and the rest of the world was kind of dealing with an influx of refugees coming from Syria, fleeing the violence. I kind of had this outcry where I was like, you know what, like Syrians are not migrating birds. And somehow this relationship between man, animals, and how we understand our position in nature was very evocative facing that situation.
The site of our intervention is in the occupied Western Jolan. As you probably know, the Western Jolan was occupied in 1967, and 97% of the indigenous population were forced to flee in 6 days' time. Many, many, many things have happened in the last 7 decades since '67. Probably one of the most important is how the state of Syria itself is now becoming disentangled, and due to the popular uprising against the regime that then has now transformed into an international war. I feel that the people in the Jolan are in many ways extremely representative of a sustained courage in the face of multiple forms of violence. They're also a population that fundamentally have been forgotten by the vast majority of people around the world. The violence is one that extends onto their livelihood and onto their bodies. Of the 340 villages and farmsteads that were present in the Jolan in 1967, only 5 exist today. And in many ways, this is very representative of the contemporary Syrian condition, where many homes have been destroyed by shelling. State surveillance is something that is now part of the everyday. People are dying. And I feel that as a collective, although this is a huge tragedy, that there's almost nothing that we can do to somehow, there's nothing that we can do. We want to participate in the struggle of our people. We want to be part of what is happening. We understand that our tools are very modest. We understand that our abilities are very modest. In many ways, we're very similar, or what we do is very similar to what the Scarecrow does, where it's very difficult to actually measure success and failure. But we think that within our modest tools, even from far away, whether that far away is Beirut or New York or Milan, we actually can participate in this larger struggle against injustice.
والنسيم يسري عليه